fourth meeting of the House Transportation Committee for this session. I would ask our members and our guests if you would please silence your cell phones for this meeting. With that, Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Representative Branscombe.
Here.
Representative Bridges.
Here.
Representative Camuel.
Here.
Representative Elliott. Representative Fleming. Representative Hale.
Here.
Representative Heverin.
Here.
Representative Herron. Representative Hodgson.
Here.
Representative Huff.
Here.
Representative Imes.
Here.
Representative Lewis.
Here.
Representative McCool.
Here.
Representative Mosier. Representative Neighbors.
Here.
Representative Palumbo. Representative Roberts.
Here.
Representative Smith. Representative Tackett Lafferty.
Here.
Representative Thomas. Representative Upchurch.
Here.
Representative Wesley. Representative Williams.
Here.
Vice Chair Dixon.
Here.
Chairman Planton.
Present. And it looks like we do have a quorum present and are duly constituted to do business. Next order of business is approval of minutes. A copy is in the minutes for the January 23rd meeting is in your folders. If there's no edits or corrections to those minutes, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Motion and second to approve the minutes has been made. Those in favor say aye. Any opposed, nay. Minutes are adopted. Everybody okay? Got beeping going on. Do any members have any guests they'd like to introduce? I see Representative Hale has one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that today. I am joined today here in this committee meeting with my grandson, Gavin Hale, and he's here today to follow around Grandpa in the session today. So please make Gavin welcome today.
Welcome, Gavin. We're glad you're here with us today. Anyone else have any guests they'd like to introduce? Seeing none, we will move forward. Today we will have a discussion of Kentucky's lawsuit against the Federal Highway Administration. That'll be our first item on the agenda. The discussion is the recently filed lawsuit by the Kentucky Attorney General's Office over the rules implemented by the Federal Highway Administration, which would essentially require the Transportation Cabinet to monitor CO2 emissions and potentially hold the Cabinet responsible if those emissions do not decline. We have a representative from of both the AG's office and the Cabinet here to discuss this matter today. From the AG's office, we have Mr. Victor Maddox, Special Counsel for the litigation in Attorney General Coleman's office. Mr. Maddox, if you would make your way to the table and introduce yourself to the committee members, and if you could give us a summary of what's going on with this lawsuit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am Victor Maddox. I'm special counsel for special litigation in the office of Attorney General Coleman, and I welcome the opportunity to brief the committee on the rule that you've mentioned and the lawsuit that we have filed. On December 7th, the Federal Highway Administration issued a new rule requiring the measurement and the setting of targets for the reduction of tailpipe emissions of carbon dioxide on the national highway system roadways. Kentucky has about 4,000 miles of roads that are subject to this rule, and it's the majority of the commerce and tourism and the like on the interstate highways and the other roads that are part of that system. The emissions rule requires the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet and every other state Department of Transportation, as well as each metropolitan planning organization in Kentucky, and there are 9 such organizations in Kentucky, including Northern Kentucky, the Evansville-Henderson area, Huntington, Ashland, Lexington, Louisville, Bowling Green, Clarksville, Christian County, E-Town, and Owensboro. They're all required to set targets and measure the tailpipe emissions on these highways, and then see to it that the targets are continually declining over time. The initial target is has to be, according to the department, the Federal Highway Administration, at least negative 0.1%. So 0.1% has to decline. Historically, the states have set their own targets for all of the performance measures under the statutes and rules that govern this provision. In fact, up until December, there was no rule in place for the state transportation cabinet to measure or set targets for declining greenhouse gas emissions, principally carbon dioxide. In addition to setting the target, creating the metric, monitoring the emissions, the report that's required to be submitted by the state includes a discussion of how the target relates to other long-term performance expectations set forth in the state's transportation plans. And I know this committee is familiar with those plans, the long-term improvement plan, for instance, as well as I believe the Transportation Cabinet's mission declares that it is to create good roads leading to good jobs. There is a real question about whether this rule, the emissions rule, is consistent with that long-term plan and the mission of the cabinet, and certainly of the General Assembly's policy regarding fossil fuels, greenhouse gas emissions, and the like. On December 22nd, on behalf of the Commonwealth, the Attorney General's office filed a lawsuit in federal district court in Louisville, actually in the Paducah Division, challenging the rule as being arbitrary and capricious under the Administrative Procedure Act, as well as a violation of the Major Questions Doctrine, a violation of the Spending Clause of the United States Constitution, and an infringement on the sovereignty of the states under the separation of powers in the Constitution. We have agreed with the Federal Highway Administration that the rule, which would have been effective on February 1st, will not go into effect, will not be enforced before March 29th. In the meantime, we are briefing the matter. We filed our summary judgment motion and memorandum on Friday of last week. The Federal Highway Administration, represented by the U.S. Department of Justice, will file its brief on the 23rd. We'll file a reply brief on, I think, the 29th of February. Judge Beaton in the Western District Court will have a hearing on March 7, and then he has promised to have an opinion issued before the rule goes into effect on March 29th. So that's kind of where we are. I will say that in January, I received an email from the Transportation Cabinet notifying me that the Cabinet intends to comply with the rule so long as it is in effect. I don't know if that means that they plan to comply on or before March 29th, regardless of what happens in court, or if they have some other date in mind. That's the basis for the lawsuit. I wanted to give you just a quick overview of the the nature of our complaint. We believe, and we have alleged, that the emissions rule represents yet another unlawful attempt by the Biden administration to use its limited regulatory authority as a means of circumventing Congress to achieve its policy goals. The policy goal in question, of course, is the Biden administration's declared goal of a 50% reduction of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas emissions from 2005 levels no later than 2030. So in just 6 years, they want to see a 50% reduction from the levels of 15 or 17 years ago, as well as net zero carbon dioxide emissions by 2050. As we've alleged in our lawsuit, the emissions rule demands a fundamental change to how billions of dollars in transportation funds are allocated by forcing states to make particular policy choices that will have far-reaching impact on transportation systems and economies. The emission rule affects a fundamental change to the power structure between the federal government and the states, and in our view violates the statutes authorizing the federal aid highway transportation program that is in question here. I should also tell you that the cabinet, the Federal Highway Administration takes the position that there are no penalties for failure to actually achieve declining greenhouse gas emissions. They demand that the state actually set targets, measure the targets, and the targets have to be declining targets. If you fail to meet those targets, then they demand a detailed plan and explanation for how the state intends to come into compliance with those targets. But at the same time, they claim that there are no actual penalties in their rule for failing to do so. So that's, in fact, part of the reason why we claim the rule is arbitrary and capricious, because they're purporting to exercise control over the state's policies, and they're purporting to subject the state to the compliance costs of the rule, and yet they refuse to actually explain what the penalties might be or what the consequences. We have affidavits in the record in our lawsuit from, I believe, 14 states, and they're from the heads of their departments of transportation. Each of them stands for the proposition that complying with this rule will compel state transportation cabinets to alter the way in which they evaluate the use of highway road funds under the federal aid program, and that it is likely impossible to set and achieve declining tailpipe emissions targets while also pursuing the state's economic development priorities that are represented by plans already either approved or under consideration by the states. And these are each of the other states in our lawsuit. We have 20 other states as plaintiffs in our lawsuit. I can tell you that Florida, for instance, which is a much bigger state, believes that over the next 1 year period, it will cost the state of Florida over $3 million to come into compliance with the rule, and nearly $22 million over the next 10-year period. Ohio, for instance, has declared in an affidavit that complying with the rule will take away tax revenue from the state, because the only way to comply is to effectively reduce the use of gasoline and internal combustion engines, and therefore a whole lot of the state's revenue base is going to disappear. So those are some of the concerns we have with the lawsuit. We allege multiple reasons why the lawsuit, why the rule should be invalidated: arbitrary and capricious, violation of the Constitution, and the major questions doctrine principally among them. I should also point out that in the lawsuit, we make reference to a number of the comments submitted with the rule, which stand for the proposition that the science behind the Federal Highway Administration's rule, and effectively the Biden administration's executive orders compelling each federal agency as part of its whole of government approach, compelling them to find ways to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. The comments in the record, and that we have made reference to in our filings, demonstrate that there are very serious problems with the modeling and with the scientific presumptions that underlie the models that give rise to these rules. So we're hopeful that the federal court will invalidate this rule, and we're looking forward to an opinion from the judge before it goes into effect at the end of March. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Maddox, for that briefing. This administration filed this requirement back in December, I believe, first part of December. The federal administration, I only became aware of it Wednesday, was not aware of it nor the lawsuit, and so I got a inclination that maybe they're saying there's no penalty for not following it, but there may be reasons to not justify giving us some of our federal road dollars if we don't. try to bind our hands with that. But we do have a guest with us, Whip Nemus, and I'm going to allow him an opportunity to speak and ask a question.
Thank you,
Whip
Mr.
Nemus.
Chairman. I want to thank you for bringing this issue before us, and I'll have questions. Is the cabinet also here? I'll have questions for them later. But my questions to you, Mr. Maddox, and I'm not going to get into the science or the lawsuit. It's in able hands, and the judge will do what he does, and I assume there's appellate court for any problems that might arise from the district court opinion. But my question is this, as the chairman just alluded to, I'm assuming, and tell me where I'm wrong on this, I'm assuming that if this goes into effect, there will be significant planning for changes in the way we come up with our road plan. Is that correct?
Well, ultimately, I think the Transportation Cabinet has to answer that question. It is our view, and the averments in our lawsuit stand for the proposition that complying with this rule will require state transportation cabinets to reevaluate the programs that they've already approved, or to alter the way in which they evaluate future programs, because most of these programs are designed to create more efficient transportation, to expand opportunities for commuting, to eliminate congestion, all of which involves road building and improving the existing roads. And to do that while also reducing tailpipe emissions is going to require some change, either in the road projects themselves or in the type of vehicles on those roads.
Right. And Mr. Maddox, we care about environmental concerns up here, obviously, but we also care about economic development. I'm not saying that the state administration doesn't, but in our state constitution and in our statutes, the authority that comes up with a road plan and any implementation plan that's submitted to the federal government that would encumber appropriated dollars, which can only be appropriated by the General Assembly, has to go through the legislature. It is now mid-February. It's been 3 months or so since this rule has been promulgated, and we've not been contacted, so far as I know. We've got the transportation chairman here. We have also Representative Upchurch, who's our point person and coming up with a road plan, and we've not been talked to. So I don't know how we're going to comply with anything because the governor doesn't have authority to do that. Is my understanding of the Kentucky law and the authority to come up with a road plan and to appropriate dollars incorrect?
I'd hesitate to say it's incorrect, but I would also hesitate to, give a full-throated endorsement to it. I'm not an expert on the interrelationship between the budget and the Transportation Committee or the Transportation Cabinet. So I do know, and we have, I think, mentioned in the complaint that there is a lot of federal funding involved. The Highway Administration has made clear in the notice leading to this final rule that even though there are no penalties in the rule, there are other provisions in the regulations governing the funding of state highway transportation cabinets that could lead to penalties. And so I think, just as Chairman Blanton said, there could be implications for failure to meet the requirement. And as far as the budget goes, I do know that in the state long-term improvement plan that the cabinet has on its website, it makes a clear reference to the fact that the planning and the funding is closely overseen by the legislature and ultimately approved by it.
And that's required by Section 230 of our Constitution, which says only we can appropriate dollars. Mr. Chairman, I'll have questions for the cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will remind members that copies of the state's lawsuit and the motion for summary judgment are included under the meeting materials tab on the committee's website for this meeting. So if anyone would like to reference that. Doesn't look like there's any other questions. Thank you, Mr. Maddox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Next, we will hear from Deputy Secretary Mike Hancock for the Transportation Committee. Is here with us today, and Deputy Hancock, we certainly appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to be here with us today. And if you'll introduce yourself for the record, and you may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, it is indeed my pleasure to be here with you today. I am Mike Hancock. I'm the Deputy Secretary for the Transportation Cabinet. Today, as we share our perspective on what you've just heard about, let me just say that the Transportation Cabinet appreciates and respects the concerns expressed by the Kentucky Attorney General.
Excuse me, Deputy Secretary, would you please pull your mic just a little
Sorry.
closer to you?
Yes.
Thank you. Don't mean to interrupt you.
No problem at all. I'm usually sensitive to do that, and I was trying to make sure I could see my paper. So, thank you. All right, so let's begin over so that you can hear. And let me just say that the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet sincerely appreciates and respects the concerns that were expressed by the Kentucky Attorney General and the other attorneys general across the country about FHWA's greenhouse gas rulemaking. We understand that the implementation date for the initial greenhouse gas report to federal highways has been delayed from February 1st, 2024 to March 29th, 2024 to allow the court time to properly review and consider the issues raised by the attorneys general. The Transportation Cabinet will certainly comply with any court orders in this regard. Make no mistake about that. Should the judge not suspend the new greenhouse gas rule requirements, the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet will comply with the FHWA greenhouse gas rule. We have a great relationship with our Federal Highway Division Office partners here in Kentucky, and we are in the habit of meeting the federal requirements to ensure that we do not endanger either the relationship with federal highways or the nearly $1 billion in federal formula highway funding that Kentucky receives annually. So that is our perspective, and about as straight away as I can say it, and would be happy to entertain any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary. Certainly appreciate that. Quick question: Does the cabinet currently calculate or do any type of report on greenhouse gas performance in Kentucky?
Not to my knowledge, sir.
I'm just wondering, we're talking about capturing tailpipe emissions, how we accurately go about that. I'm sure there's someone smarter than me that maybe has figured out a formula to do that. But also, as far as you know, Deputy Secretary, has the cabinet ever set any emissions regulation targets on or performance targets to be met under federal law? We've never did that before, have we?
No, sir, not to my knowledge. I will say that for our MPOs, we've had air quality issues in the past. And so for some of our more urbanized areas, I know that there have been such calculations that folks have undertaken to deal with congestion mitigation, air quality programs, and that kind of thing, but nothing to this level.
Sure, very good. We do have some questions from some members. Representative Bridges.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's good to see you, Mike. We appreciate you coming down. I'm wondering, I'm looking at how we set up to monitor this. So my question today is, do you have any idea how much staff time it would require to perform these activities needed and to set initial targets and comply with the emissions rules, say just the first year?
No, sir, we do not. Honestly, we've been watching the lawsuit and waiting to see the outcome of that. So we have not invested significant effort at all.
Okay, and then another question, Mr. Chair. Over a longer span, say 10 years, a decade out or whatever, here again, has there been any efforts for the cabinet to estimate the staff time that it would take to do this? I mean, if you haven't done it in a year, you haven't done it in the long term. I just really worried about what cost is involved in, the escalation of it and everything.
Sure. Appreciate that, but no, sir, we have not looked long term.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And next, looks like Vice Chair Dixon has some questions.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. To your knowledge, how many or are there any cabinet employees working on the metrics that are actually called for in the emissions rule?
I'm not aware of how many folks would be involved in that. Again, this is all very early, and we're still waiting to see how it plays out before we take any significant action at all.
Okay, I got one follow-up, Mr. Do you believe the cabinet would need to redirect any staff to comply with that emissions rule if it was to go in place?
It's very early to say. At this point, I would say no. I think we have significant or sufficient staff to do what would be required. But again, this whole process is something we just haven't spent a lot of time delving into at this moment, recognizing the lawsuit and the pending action from that.
Right. I got one more follow-up, if I may. So, to the best of your knowledge, you're saying that at this point, no one at the cabinet has taken any action or actually done any planning, even though this has been out since December?
We've attended. I think there have been a couple of webinars that have been held on this subject, and a couple of our folks have attended those and attempted to take notes and be aware. I mean, we're always trying to be aware of what's going on at the federal level, but in terms of action here, nothing to my knowledge.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Whip Nemus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Secretary, for coming.
Sir.
So I think you may have answered that question, but let me ask it directly. I've got a few questions. What has the cabinet done to comply thus far?
All we've done is stay aware and attend some webinars, and that's virtually been the extent of it so far, and just the general awareness.
Okay, so there's a hearing on March the 7th. We just heard from the Attorney General's office. The judge intends to get a hearing or get a ruling very quickly, obviously, even assuming there is no appeal. That will not leave much time until the rule goes into effect. I think the testimony was on March 27th. So what will you do? What will the Transportation Cabinet do to comply? You say you're going to comply. What does that mean?
What that means is we will work to, assuming that the judge does not do away with the greenhouse gas rule. If he declares that that's still going to be in effect, then the cabinet would work to comply with federal rule, as we're in the habit of doing. And so that would mean that we would need to muster the appropriate folks to put together, an appropriate response to the Federal Highway Administration.
So if he rules within 14 days, that gives you about a week.
Yes.
Assuming that, so it seems to me that it would be irresponsible to wait to move forward to try to comply, because in order to comply, the plan would need to say, here's how we need to first of all measure these things, because we don't measure them, and here's how we're going to meet these standards. Here's the roads that don't. I mean, I assume that's going to be a total overhaul of the road plan, which we've enacted in the last 3 sessions, and probably more than that. Yeah. So how would we comply in a week or two? So it seems irresponsible to do that. And then the last question I have, you're shaking your head, so you agree with that?
No, I'm understanding what you're saying.
So you
but
think
I'm not agreeing.
You think you can get all that done in a week?
Yes, sir. I think we can. I mean, what we're seeing from the webinars that we've been part of is that the initial response is not all that detailed.
Do you think the governor or the executive branch has the authority to bind the Commonwealth of Kentucky's road plan, or to change the road plan that has been enacted, or to appropriate dollars that have not been appropriated?
I think the federal, and I don't see any way that that's part of this initial process.
Well, if the process is to create an implementation plan, and that implementation plan would include measuring emissions, determining how you're going to reduce those in half, that would by necessity require us to change our road plan in addition to the other things I've just identified. So how would that not require the involvement in the General Assembly?
Yeah, at this point, I mean, we're not putting the cart before the horse. We've got a lawsuit and litigation that we need to pay close attention to, and we are doing that. Whatever the outcome of that litigation, the cabinet will further pursue its obligation in whichever direction it's obligated.
I
at
understand
time
that, but
to pursue.
I'm positing to you that it's irresponsible to wait until March the 20th to comply with something March 27th. Even assuming you had the authority to do it, which I do not believe you do. So it seems to me, and when we heard about this by happenstance, when were you guys going to inform the General Assembly of this requirement that will have substantial impact on hundreds of millions of dollars in our road fund? When were you going to inform the General Assembly of this?
We will when we know that it's a reality. I mean, right now this is up in the air. The lawsuit is up in the air. We don't know what we're going to get yet, and we're trying to be aware, trying to do the best we can with it. But at the end of the day, what we hear from the webinars we're attending is that there will be ample time for us to deal with whatever comes. And so,
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that. I would submit that there needs to be communications ongoing immediately between the General Assembly and the executive branch for two reasons. One, it's not prudent or responsible to wait until the court rules, if it rules, by March the 27th. And secondly, I want to be very clear about this. The authority does not reside in the governor's hands on how to appropriate money. That starts with Representative Upchurch's committee, moves through the House, goes through the Senate, and then it goes to the governor for a signature, a veto, and then a conversation. So it is not only imprudent, it's irresponsible, and I think illegal for any submission to be made on behalf of the Commonwealth of Kentucky that would bind dollars that only the General Assembly can appropriate. So there's no allegations being made right now, although I'm close to them. I believe you need to immediately have a conversation with the appropriating authorities. I don't understand why that hasn't occurred. I would certainly make the proposal that it happen by the end of the day. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Duly noted, Whip Nemus. Thank you. Next up, Representative Elliott has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hancock, for your testimony. I think we all heard Mr. Maddox's testimony related to the number of states that are challenging this regulation. In those states that are challenging this regulation, what are their transportation departments doing? And what, if any, consultation has our transportation cabinet had with those states and how they're going to respond to ultimately whether this rule is upheld or not, depending on in their particular state? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative, I'm not exactly aware of what other states may be doing in detail with this. I know that there are lines being drawn, and Kentucky has done its best to stay at a distance and to review all of this objectively, and that is exactly what we are attempting to do.
Couple real quick follow-ups from me since everyone else is finished. Deputy Secretary, we certainly appreciate you being here. We've learned, just in learning of this, that General Assembly wasn't aware of, but has the Cabinet had any type of discussions with any federal agencies in regarding this implementation?
Not outside of the webinars that have been offered.
And that's more of a set and listen, take notes
Yes,
type
sir.
thing. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And what about, has the Cabinet had any discussions with federal agencies about Mr. Maddox's lawsuit? Have you all discussed that amongst any of the federal agencies? That's
No,
going
sir.
on?
We have
Okay.
not.
All right, very good. I think that's it, Deputy Secretary. We certainly appreciate you coming here, being with us. I know that this was thrown on you all in December, and us last week, and it's definitely still a moving target in process. We would appreciate the Cabinet and the Attorney General's office if they would keep us apprised as this thing moves forward as to the results of the suit, and also what, if anything, the Cabinet may be doing moving forward. As has been mentioned, the General Assembly is obviously concerned about the impact this could potentially have on our road funds and our road projects as we move forward. So we would appreciate that you all keep us informed from both of you all. Okay? Thank you, Deputy Secretary.
Thank you, sir.
All right, next up, we have one bill on our agenda this week, and that bill is going to be for discussion only. And let me lay out the parameters for this bill. We've already went longer than any committee meeting we've had, I believe, this session. So, okay, so we're going to hear for discussion only House Bill 33, Representative Kevin Bratcher, and he and his guest will have 10 minutes to present. And then we have some follow-ups from that. We have Mr. David Hale from CXX and William Downey from RJ Corman. They will be given 10 minutes each as well to present. So we're trying to keep on a schedule here. And with that, representatives, if you will state your names for the record, introduce your guest, you may begin.
Kevin Bratcher, State Representative, 29th District.
Ashley Tackett Lafferty, State Representative for the 95th District.
And we have Mark Elkins with us here. He will be doing the most speaking. He's with the BLE. House Bill 33 is simply a requirement in Kentucky to keep a two-person crew, on trains that are not in the rail yard, the ones that are on the main line. This bill's been kicked around here for a while. It's pretty simple to understand. It comes down to human control. How much more, we all know automation is coming. We got driverless cars, and technology is a friend of ours in many ways, and it's coming, and there's no doubt about it. But man, how much do we want to give a 2-mile train full of terrible chemicals, reduce it down to one set of eyes, and if that lady or guy has a heart attack or something, then that train is on its own. Now, I know that there's a lot of safeguards out there, but we're going to present for the next 10 minutes, I guess 9 now. I'll shut up here and let Representative Tackett Lafferty have the microphone. But just think about this. How much danger do we want out there with just one person? And then in one day, it might be very much remote control. So just think about that. So take it away, Ashley.
Thank you. As many of you know, I represent Eastern Kentucky. Some of you may not know, however, that I am married to an old railroader. So I appreciate...
Representative Tackett, could you scoot your mic closer to you?
Sure. Is that better? Okay. So I appreciate the opportunity to sit at the table today and talk about the importance of rail safety. I'm sure that we are all familiar here with the Oklahoma City bombing. The Oklahoma City bombing, which happened in 1995, caused the death of 168 people. It injured 680 people. It damaged 325 buildings and caused over $650 million in damage. All of this was caused by 2 tons of ammonium nitrate mixed with fuel oil, which was stored inside a van parked outside the federal building. All that damage was caused by fueling 2 tons of ammonium nitrate. Daily, though, along the Big Sandy, a train with 1 to 2 engines filled with 4,000 to 8,000 gallons of diesel fuel can carry up to 200 cars, which is around 2 miles worth of train, and one car alone can hold up to 60 tons of ammonium nitrate. So all that damage caused during the Oklahoma City bombing was caused by less than 3% of the chemicals that could be carried in one train car which travels the Big Sandy daily. Obviously, these chemicals can be transported safely because it is done nearly every day in Eastern Kentucky with a two-person crew. The need for safe transport of these hazardous materials by skilled workers, though, is crucial across the Commonwealth. Rail safety is more important than many of you may realize because it is an unforgiving industry and we don't often hear about small train wrecks. I'll pass it along to the fellow who works in the industry.
If we could let Mark Elkins have the floor, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Elkins, please introduce yourself for the record, and you may begin.
My name is Mark Elkins. I'm a local.
Pull your mic up closer to you, Mr. Elkins.
My name is Mark.
Push your green light.
How do you turn it on?
Hit the button.
There we go. How about that? Hey, my name is Mark Elkins. I'm a locomotive engineer, and I've been working in the railroad industry for 28 years. I've served as a trainman, a conductor, an RCO operator, a locomotive engineer, a safety representative, and currently I work as the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen. I'm their safety contact statewide. Every Class 1 railroad that has an engineer operating on it, I'm their safety contact in the state of Kentucky. In Kentucky, we operate about 2,400 miles of railroad across this state with very minimal regulations. The federal government does very little to regulate. So I'm going to give you some reasons, and I think everybody's aware that when you look at trains today versus trains when you were young, like Representative Blanton, when he was a young man like myself, trains were 75 or 80 cars long. They weren't like they are today. Today they build trains 180, 230, 240 cars long. And that extra set of eyes and ears in the event of a catastrophic event, that trainman, that conductor, the first thing he does is he goes to the ground and begins inspecting the train, looking for the reason why the train went into emergency. That's his first priority. The locomotive engineer is the operator. He moves that train. So if you have 2 miles of train, you need that guy. You need his eyes and ears to look back. It's a moving observation for him. So he looks. He also, in the event of a collision with an automobile, he's usually the first responder. I could give you many cases where they went back and saved lives of collisions. But the most important is he's the alarm system. He's your alert, your community alert. If that train derails, like the one, I'm going to give you a prime example of on Thanksgiving in Livingston, Kentucky. And I've got this, and I've carried this around for a long time. What I highlighted are the hazardous material cars in that train. There's 183 cars long. It had locomotive power. It's so eerily identical to East Palestine, it would make you sick if you really knew. It had distributed power locomotive placed back in the back of the train. This train, it could have been East Palestine times 5, and I say that seriously because if you look, that train derailed through here in this section of the train where it was only molten sulfur. It was a hazardous material, but let me assure you, had that train derailed on the last page, we'd all be talking a different story. You'd have everybody sitting in here pounding their fist, wanting some regulation. That conductor, Billy Owens, got off the train and found that derailment between 10 and 15 minutes. Now, the railroads are going to tell you, it'll be okay, let the federal government do it. They'll take care of this. The reality is they would have placed that conductor in Corbin or Cincinnati. He would have gotten a truck, and they're not going to do away with the conductor. That's not the risk. They're going to move him. They're going to displace him off that train, and they're going to use a few less of them, and they're going to save some money. So they're going to move him to a far-off location, and then he's going to be responsible to drive an hour from Corbin to Livingston just to begin the inspection. Had that train derailed on the last page, we'd be singing a different song. And so I always say this, and it's true. No one would go into your child or grandchild's home and remove their CO2 and their smoke detector out of the house and put it in the driveway. It wouldn't make sense. And I'm asking you, here's your chance. Don't remove that CO2 and smoke detector out of your community. These trains are big. They reduced from 5 crew members down to 2 crew members. And now they want to go to a single crew member. It's just too risky. It's not safe. I live in Kentucky. My kids live here. I'm going to have my first grandchild. They live within 50 yards of the railroad tracks. It's important to me that we protect the people in Kentucky and they're safe. Railroads work for profits. They don't get up in the mornings and say, what can we do to make Kentucky safer? They get up and talk about things like operating ratios and train velocity and things like that. That's their focus, money. And I get it. I need for them to make money because I also prosper from that. But on the same token, they need to be responsible as operators inside of our state. And that's what we're asking. There's other states that have already passed this legislation. You've got Ohio, Kansas, California, Wisconsin, Arizona, West Virginia. The list goes on and on. There's states entertaining the same legislation today. And I don't mean to sound rushed, but I'm trying to get it all in 10 minutes or in whatever I have left. But In the words of the Transportation Secretary standing in East Palestine, quote, he said, Norfolk Southern and other freight railroad companies need to stop fighting us every time we try to do a regulation. And they do. They're here today to fight any regulation.
You have 1 minute left.
Thank you. They're never going to stop. They don't want to be regulated. They want to be able to run as they wish. The 3 Class 1 railroads that operate in the state of Kentucky, their value is somewhere around $240 billion. Surely they can afford to leave a conductor on that train for safety purposes for us. These smaller railroads, they still operate in the $300 and $400 million annual operating, income. They could also, but they're going to cry, we can't afford it, or, the reality is, it's our obligation to protect our people. Our Constitution says we have the right to be safe, and I'll end with that. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Elkins. You made it with 10 seconds to spare. We do have a couple questions, and we will keep the questions quick so we can get on to our follow-ups. Representative Bridges.
Yes, thank you. I believe that crew sizes and everything are addressed in your contracts. And so my question is, if that's so, then how would this affect collective bargaining?
Crew size is not contractual. That is, there is a contract for the trainman conductor and there's a contract for the engineer, but it's not a contract about the location and where we work at.
Okay. One follow-up question real quick. Okay. I know the FRA deals with safety issues relating to rail transportation, and it's my understanding that single crews are permitted on the federal level with passenger trains, which to me is the most vital commodity you could have on a railroad, and such as Amtrak. And why would we require more stringent standards on a freight train when we're handling people and we don't require them for that?
Well, I'll answer that. It's, a train wreck with people, passengers, that's a horrible thing. But a train wreck with these chemicals is a catastrophe. We're talking about, there's possibilities of taking out a whole town the size of Eddyville, I guess. That's where you're from, right, Randy? We're talking about massive amounts of damage here. You saw what happened in East Palestine.
And how many people died?
0 in East Palestine, but you can also go to Lac Magnetic, Quebec, and look at the oil train with a single-man crew on it, where 47 people died. They were fully incinerated. But now, to answer your question about the Amtrak, there's 3 people on the Amtrak train. There's one on the head end, there's a conductor inside, and there's a baggage handler inside. So it's not a single-man crew. They communicate by radio inside the train.
But there's still people, and we're talking about engineers. So I just think we need to keep that relative in what we're looking at, because we've heard this bill 10 times. Twice in a couple of sessions I've been here, and I've been here 6, so I've heard it a number of times. And I just like I say, I think this is a place where government's trying to intervene in private sector and our free market. So thank you.
Representative Hebron.
Thank you. I just have a brief comment, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Elkins, I'm up here behind the pole. I appreciate you coming. I know we had a good conversation last week. I think one of my concerns would be a lot of times in state government, we talk about a slippery slope. And this is one of those situations where I feel like, if we start with trains, are we going to do semi-trucks next? Are we going to have to create a 2-seater forklift? How far does this go? Because if we start on one thing, are we going to have to continue down the road of adding a 2-man crew to other ways of transportation? And so I want to share that with the committee. I do think it starts a slippery slope, and what Representative Bridges said, it really starts getting into the private sector when, as to us, we want to stay out of that as much as we can. So thank you.
I would like to say that at this point we're not adding to the crew size. This is currently basically the way they operate in the state of Kentucky, which I guess is a lot of the argument for HB7, trying to keep a driver behind a wheel with commercial vehicles. But I do think that if you look at like Amtrak, I think there was a wreck maybe in New York where the speed limit was maybe 65 and the engineer was going over 100 miles an hour. He hit a curve, the train wrecked, and there were hundreds of people killed. Now on a train that transports freight, the conductor has a brake stick where if something happens to his engineer and he has to stop the train, then he's capable of doing that because of the importance of everything they're hauling behind them. And also, I think it speaks to the importance of the alertness of the engineer in freight trains when they have what's called an alerter. So every few minutes, if there's no action inside of that train, every few minutes an alerter will go off. And until the engineer hits that alerter, it will just keep going off and keep getting louder because they're trying to make sure nobody's asleep or they're paying attention to what they're doing. So I think that you can look that up for as far as passenger trains. It's not always the safest. That a tragedy like that may have been able to be stopped with a two-man crew on a passenger train.
Okay, we're approaching 5 minutes on question and answers. And we've
I-
got 4 more people that's got questions, and I want this to move on. So each one I'm going to let ask one question, and I want short responses. I don't need to hear narratives. We're trying to move this process as far as quickly as possible. Representative Camuel.
You got it. I do have a simple question. Does federal law prevent us from doing this in Kentucky?
There is no preemptive law already that in place to interfere with this. Other states have already done it. Ohio, as most recent. To answer your question, a train is 550 to 600 tractor trailer loads of freight. Representative Hevron.
Representative Upchurch.
Real quick, are the feds looking at doing something similar to this already?
The federal government has taken some approach. They've discussed it in Congressman, I think, or Senator, maybe Vance and Sherrod Brown, both out of Ohio. They have discussed it, but there's nothing. I think it's at gridlock right now about a rail safety bill.
I thought it was going to be, when I first had talked to this bill, I thought FRA could make regulations on this, but it's not. Congress would have to pass a law, and you know how frequent that is.
Representative Branscombe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Am I correct that railroads have legally challenged this in other states where it has passed and have won?
My understanding is no. I think the LRC has already given a ruling out of Kentucky that it is legal to do so, and there is no preemptive law or any interference that would prevent it. They have answered on a rail crossing, fining railroads for blocking crossings. So their bad behavior blocking railroad crossings for hours or days are perfectly legal, and the state has no right or avenue for penalty. They can only tell them not to do it, and they can tell them no. So,
Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that alluded to part of my question was if we have a set a standard and they have to travel from one state to another, if you're getting into interstate commerce or problems with the federal regulation.
The Interstate Commerce Commission dissolved, I think, in 1995, and it was handed over to the NSTB or National Safety Transportation Board or whatever. And there is really no. You would only be applying law within your state. And I work in a location exactly like you speak of. I operate trains that go to Cincinnati all along through Maysville, Augusta, and we haul. I've hauled millions of carloads of dangerous chemicals across those networks, even into Columbus, Ohio. We go to Cincinnati. A lot of the freight that travels right through the heart of Kentucky originates out of Cincinnati, goes to Corbin, and comes out of Cincinnati on the Norfolk Southern line. Those are like the Livingston derailment. That train originated in Cincinnati, Ohio. and it was loaded with dangerous chemicals. There's one of the largest hump yards in the country in Cincinnati, Ohio, which distributes freight into Kentucky.
Okay, so that's going to conclude our questions, and at 8 minutes and 25 seconds in questions. So that means the other side is going to get 10 minutes to present and 8 minutes, 25 seconds, if necessary, for questions. Thank you all for bringing your presentation to us. And next up, we will have Mr. David Hall from from CSX, and William Downey from R.J. Corman Railroad. Gentlemen, please take your seats at the table, and if you would state your names for the record, you may begin. Please turn the mic up.
There we go.
Yep.
David Hall, Director of Government Affairs for CSX here in Kentucky.
I'm William Downey with R.J. Corman Railroad Group.
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we do appreciate the opportunity to be with you and to provide some brief comments on House Bill 33, on the crew size mandate issue, as well as to spend a couple minutes talking with you about rail safety and what we're doing within the industry. First, wanted to thank Representative Bratcher, Representative Tackett-Lafferty, and the other sponsors of House Bill 33, not only for their support of the rail industry, but more specifically for their interests in the safety of the railroad workers. At CSX and the other railroads that operate in Kentucky, safety certainly is our top priority. We spend a lot of time, energy, resources in making our railroads safer every day. So we do appreciate our shared interest in rail safety. As for the crew size mandate issue, as Representative Bridges said earlier, this is certainly an issue that we've considered or has been considered many times, not only here in Kentucky, but in other states, as well as at the federal level. And in all those cases, we believe that the efforts have failed to demonstrate a safety justification for crew size mandates. We think this type of legislation also overlooks the fact that some freight railroads, as well as Amtrak and some commuter lines, hundreds of which operate with one person in the cab of the locomotive each day and do so safely, as was mentioned earlier as well. This bill also doesn't take into account that the rail industry has invested more than $12 billion just in the last 14 years in new technology to improve rail safety for our employees and the public through an initiative called Positive Train Control, which you may have heard about earlier. It's also important to mention that the Federal Railroad Administration, which is the agency responsible for regulating our industry, does not mandate minimum crew staffing requirements. In fact, over the last 15 years, the FRA, as well as the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, has extensively evaluated the issue of crew size and never found any data showing that two-person crews are any safer than one-person crews. We also believe that House Bill 33, if passed, would disrupt the collective bargaining process, something that was mentioned earlier, through which decisions on crew size have traditionally been made. Railroads and union leadership no longer would be able to make train staffing decisions based on innovations and new technologies, as has been the case in prior decades. To expand on that, over the last year, our company has been working with union leadership to reach agreement with several of the unions on new contracts, resulting in substantial pay increases, as well as some quality of life enhancements like paid sick leave. We're always looking for new ways to improve the quality of life of our employees, and there may be other innovations down the road. Something that was referenced earlier, ground-based conductors, which are taking conductors out of the cab of the locomotive and putting them in to a truck with a dedicated territory. I think, we look at this as a quality of life enhancement. Those folks under that model, we think, would spend less time out on the road and away from home and away from their families, and also an opportunity to have those jobs work more efficiently. Such innovations are really important to our industry if we are to continue to attract a new generation of workers to railroading. However, we think House Bill 33 would make that difficult, if not impossible, moving forward. While William's going to share here in a minute some of the safety successes at R.J. Corman, it's important that this committee be assured that all of the railroads operating in Kentucky do so safely, and thanks to the commitment of our employees, as well as investments that we make in technology and maintenance and equipment, we're getting even safer. And just a few statistics to drive that home. The mainline accident rate for Class 1 railroads, Class 1s being the larger railroads that operate in Kentucky, that accident rate's down 48% since the year 2000. Over that same time period, track cause accidents are down 55% and are at their lowest ever rate across the entire industry. For all railroads, the derailment rate is down 31% since 2000. And the injury rate among Class 1 employees, a very important statistic for us, that's dropped 59% since 2000. And while we're certainly proud of these improvements and see them as encouraging, we're not stopping there. We spend, as I said, a lot of time and are committed to do everything we can to make the railroad safer. Lastly, I want to make sure that all members of this committee, I think it was referenced earlier about whether the FRA is looking at this issue. They are, and they're expected to make a decision on crew size as early as March 4th. So for that reason, we would strongly encourage the committee to pause on any consideration of House Bill 33 or any other crew size bill until the FRA has made their determination. So appreciate your time, and I'll turn things over to William if there are no questions.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. We also appreciate the opportunity to be here today. We thank you for the support of the rail industry and also in our shared interest in making the rail industry as safe as possible for our fellow railroad employees. Again, my name is William Downey, and I'm representing R.J. Corman Railroad Company and the Short Line Railroad interest in the conversation today. I also have with me Mr. Ray Goss, who is the president of our R.J. Corman Railroad Company. If after this we have any technical questions that are most likely above my pay grade, Mr. Goss has over 4 decades of railroading experience, and happy to address any of those as they arise. So I want to begin by making just a simple statement for the committee and for folks in attendance to understand. The railroad industry is a very safe industry. And I'll emphasize that. The railroad industry is a very safe industry. Recognizing that, and as Representative Tackett-Lafferty said, it is also a very unforgiving industry. And that is why at R.J. Corman, safety is our number one priority. Our company was founded over 50 years ago on the principles of 5 big rocks, and safety is the first big rock of R.J. Corman. Our number one goal is for all of our employees at R.J. Corman is to return home each and every day safely to their families. The safety of our employees is at the forefront of every business decision we make because we understand that a safe culture provides a winning culture. Our company operates 19 short lines in 11 different states. 3 of those are right here in Kentucky, and 2 of which date back all the way to 1987. Our network of short line railroads is annually recognized by the industry for our commitment to safety. For the previous year on record, over 17 of our railroads were recognized by the American Short Line and Regional Railroad Association for their JAKE Award, for their Industry Award for Safety. In 2022, we were at a 0.28 injury rate against the short line average of 2.01. The vast majority of our properties were recognized with distinction for having 0 recordable injuries for the entire year. As a railroad company, we have had only 1 recordable injury across our company each of the last 2 years. I want to share some insights into our operating model as a short line railroad. While the rail industry is an interconnected network and we work closely with our Class 1 partners at CSX and Norfolk Southern, our operations do vary in how we run our railroads. Short lines are by nature a first mile, last mile transportation solution for many of our industries, and we offer a high-touch, flexible service that serves many types of customers with varying and often complex freight needs. Our transportation model typically consists of an engineer in the cab of a locomotive and a conductor that rides along in support vehicle with each train. The conductor has many different roles and responsibilities traveling alongside the train to their service destination. They clear crossings, they open gates at customer location, they throw switches, performs rolling inspections of the train as it passes by, and also handles the coupling of cars. If we, as short lines, were forced to add a second employee to each locomotive on our trains in Kentucky, we would have overly burdensome costs inherited by our company and divert significant resources away from the infrastructure of the track that we operate on every day. We know from experience in the industry that investment and as a way to increase safety for our employees is by improving the quality of the track infrastructure that we operate on. My colleague at CSX laid out many of the reasons why the industry opposition to this proposed regulation, and I simply want to reiterate the following to the committee here today. Our ask is to avoid staffing mandates with no safety benefit, to shift resources away from critical and needed infrastructure upgrades, technology implementation, and operational efficiency. Again, thank you for your time and the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, Mr. Downey, Mr. Hall. Right at perfect, 10 minutes. So, in all fairness to both sides, we thank you all for coming today and sharing your presentation. We thank you for all the work that our railroads do in delivering freight across this Commonwealth each day. We do have some questions from some members, and like I said, we're going to hold to the 8 minutes, 27 seconds. Representative Tackett Lafferty.
Yes, thank you. And I do appreciate all the safety controls that I can see implemented every day. But this reducing to a one-man crew, really, the thought of it concerns me. But my question is, you talked about positive train control for purposes of safety. Is that like an automated train system? Is that?
Mr. Representative, it is a GPS-based technology. And actually I have some information here, but it's basically designed to prevent the most serious human error accidents on the railroads. Those would be train-to-train collisions, would be having a train entering an area of track where you have maintenance activity, as well as overspeed. I think you may have referenced earlier New York derailment that occurred because of excessive speed. So that technology is aimed at eliminating those type of accidents. This was something that Congress mandated back in 2008. And again, the industry spent about $12 billion coming up with the technology and then implementing it. That's mostly on our main lines where there are 5 million or more gross tons annually, as well as certain hazmats traveling on certain track that require positive train control. And then also it's used on main lines where there are intercity and commuter rail service activities.
Am I correct in that it's difficult to operate this system in the mountains because of our tunnels that go through hills and things of that nature?
I will tell you that I have a limited knowledge of PTC. That's something I can find out and get back with you on, certainly.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else have any questions? If not, thank you, gentlemen. You've got 6 minutes to spare. So we thank you for your presentation today. Very interesting discussion for sure. However, these 2 discussions today has blown our average for our meeting times out of the water. So because of that, we're just not going to meet next week. Try to bring our average back, right? We will not be meeting. Monday is a holiday, so we will not meet until the following Tuesday. With that, we can consider ourselves adjourned.